Sí, creo que vamos a empezar. Bien, muy buenas tardes
Good
para todos.
afternoon, everyone.
Muchas gracias a todos aquellos que están
Thank you
conectados. Mi nombre
for
es Sandra
joining us
Reyes, formo
today.
parte del staff de
I'm
LACNIC
part
y
of
en esta
LACNIC staff,
oportunidad
and
les doy la
today I would like
bienvenida
to
a esta
welcome you
sesión de LACNIC
to
Webinars,
this
donde
session
vamos
of
a
LACNIC
tocar el tema
webinars. We'll be
sobre
talking about
ICP2,
the
actualización y consulta abierta.
open
Antes de dar
consultation
pase
topic and
a los speakers
ICP2. And
y
before
en este
giving the
caso a
floor
María
to
Gallo,
the
gerente de
speakers,
comunicaciones de
Maria
LACNIC,
Gallo, who
para
is a
que pueda
communications manager
moderar este
from
espacio, voy
LACNIC,
a comentarles
will be the
brevemente la
moderator before
dinámica
giving
del
the floor
webinar.
to her. I
Vamos
will
a estar
be
reunidos
explaining
aquí
how it'll be
aproximadamente
working.
60
We'll
minutos
be having a session of
durante la
60
presentación
minutes
para
during the
poder hacer
presentation.
consultas.
You will
Pueden
be able
dejarlas
to
en el
ask
panel de
questions. You
Q&A o
can enter
preguntas y
your questions in
respuestas
the Q&A
en la barra inferior de la
box at
plataforma de
the
Zoom.
bottom of the
Luego
Zoom
comentarles también
screen.
que este
This
webinar cuenta
webinar
con interpretación
has
simultánea
simultaneous
en español, inglés y
interpretation
portugués.
into
Van a poder
English,
acceder
Spanish,
desde
and
ya
Portuguese. You
a
can
la opción
access
en la barra de
the
menú
option
igualmente.
in the menu
Y
bar.
comentarles que este webinar
This
está siendo
webinar
grabado
is
y
being
que próximamente
recorded,
vamos a
and
compartir
we'll
la
be
grabación
sharing the
con todos los que
recording
se
shortly
registraron.
with all those who
Y bueno,
registered.
por último, de mi
Finally,
parte,
on my behalf,
muchas gracias por su
thank you very
atención y
much
ahora
for
sí
your
le doy la
attention, and
palabra
I
a
now give the
María
floor
para que
to
pueda
Maria
presentar a
so
los
she can
panelistas.
introduce the panelists.
Adelante, María.
Maria, the floor is yours.
Bueno, muchas gracias,
Thank
Sandra.
you, Sandra.
Ahí voy a estar
So I will
compartiendo.
now share my screen.
Bueno, gracias a
Thank
todos
you,
y bienvenidos
everyone,
a
and
esta
welcome
sesión,
to
este
this
webinar,
session, to
donde,
this
como
webinar.
comentaba mi compañera
Like my
Sandra, vamos a
colleague
estar
Sandra was
hablando
saying, we'll be
de la
speaking about
actualización
the
del ICP2
update of the
y, bueno, también sobre
ICP2,
todo dejar un
and
espacio
particularly
para
to
poder poner un poco en
have
contexto,
an
comentar un
option
poco cómo viene la
to
evolución de este
set
proceso
the scene, to tell
y
you
dejar espacio
what the
para
progress has,
comentarios,
what progress has been
consultas,
achieved, and
sobre todo estamos
also
en la
have the
segunda
opportunity
ronda
for
de
asking
la
questions.
consulta
This is the
pública,
second
donde
round of the
justamente lo
public
que queremos es poder
consultation. So
dar la
what to
oportunidad
give
a toda
the
a toda
entire
la comunidad regional,
community, the regional
al igual que el
community,
resto de las
and
comunidades,
all the other
a poder
communities
conocer
to
bien cómo
have
es el
the
proceso,
opportunity
qué
of
está
learning
pasando
about
y,
this
bueno, cómo pueden
progress
participar
process,
activamente
how you
en
can
él.
actively participate
Así
in
que,
this
bueno, hoy
process.
básicamente
So basically,
la sesión, el
this
webinar,
session, this webinar,
el objetivo es
has
poner
the
un poco
goal
en
of
contexto sobre este
giving you the
documento,
context
que es
of
el
this
documento
document.
de
This
gobernanza
is
para
the
el reconocimiento, la
governance for the
creación y la
recognition
protección y el
document
establecimiento
and
de los registros
the
regionales de Internet,
recognition of regional
denominado
internet
más brevemente
registers.
documento de gobernanza de
In
los
other
RIS,
words, the RIR governance
que, bueno, que
document.
recientemente
This
hemos
document
publicado
was
el segundo
published
draft.
recently.
Y,
It
bueno,
was recently
ponerles un
published in
poquito
its second
en
draft.
contexto sobre cómo viene,
We will be
cómo
giving
viene
you
este
the
proceso.
context of the status of
Em,
this
y comentarles también,
process.
antes de arrancar con
And
la
before
presentación,
starting with the
que bueno, que es el
presentation,
primer
this is
webinar
the
que tenemos
first webinar
en la región
we
nuestra,
are
en el RIS,
organizing in the
en esta
LACNIC
segunda
region
ronda de
for the
consultas. La
second
consulta
round of
abrió un día
consultations. The
nacional sobre el
consultation
8 de
was opened
agosto
on
y
August the
está cerrando el
28th
7 de
and will be
noviembre,
closed
justo
on
porque
November the
tuvimos
7th.
este
So we
espacio
want to offer
por
this
más de mes y
space
medio
of more
para
than a
que toda
month
la
and a
comunidad
half so that
pueda
the entire
conocer,
community can
enterarse,
learn
enterarse bien de cómo viene el proceso y
about
poder leer
this
los documentos
process
que se vienen
so that you
publicando.
can read the documents
Y
that
bueno,
are
y
published
oportunamente
and
poder sumarse
also
a la consulta,
join
dado
the
que justamente cierra
consultation
el día 7 y
because
vamos a tener alguna instancia en el medio, más allá de todas las otras
we'll be
instancias
having other
en el
instances
resto
as well
de los registros, ¿no? En
in
las
the
otras
other
comunidades, otros RIS,
communities and
que están
the
haciendo también
registries
otros
in
espacios de
other parts of the
consulta.
world where
Así
consultations are also
que,
taking
nada,
place.
comentarles eso. Y
So
también otra cosa que me parecía que
one of
estaba
the
muy
other things
interesante,
that I would
que
like to share
como
with
los
you
integrantes
is
del
that
ELASO de la
the
región van a estar
ISO
haciendo esta
members of the
presentación,
region will be
que
making this
tengan a mano,
presentation,
si quieren,
and
que sepan que está el documento del draft
we have the
actualizado, publicado
updated
desde el
draft that
28, que es
was
el día que se abrió la consulta.
published on
A su vez,
the
hemos publicado la
28th of
semana
August.
pasada un par
Last
de
week, we
documentos que
published
están
a
buenos
couple of
porque
documents
realmente
that are also
dan un
interesting
contexto más
because they set
profundo
a
de la
more
información, del trabajo que se viene
wide
haciendo.
context on the
Uno de
work
ellos
that
es
is being
un red
carried out.
line, que de
One
alguna
is a
forma
red
es un
line,
documento
which
que
is a
compara la versión
document
1 con la 2,
comparing
y otro que
versions
es
one
un
and two, and
documento
then there's another
resumido. Estos
document that
dos
summarizes the two.
documentos están en inglés.
The
Uno
two
que hace
documents
un
are in
resumen
English. One
de las
summarizes
diferencias entre un
the
documento y
differences
otro y la
between one
justificación de
document
los
and the
cambios.
other.
Así que nada, que lo tengan en
And
cuenta. Lo pueden seguir
you
mientras vamos haciendo la
can
presentación, pero
follow
si no,
this
bueno, cuando
as we
termine
go
la
along, but
presentación
otherwise, after the
pueden ver que está
presentation,
público y
you
y
can check
pueden
out
consultar.
this document.
Así que bueno, sin dar más vueltas,
So without further
arrancamos
ado, we will now
con la
start
presentación de
with
hoy.
today's
Comentarles un
presentation.
poco a aquellos
For
que no
those of you
conozcan,
who are not
el
familiar with
ASO
this,
AC, las
the
funciones
ASO
del ASO
AC
AC o NRONC es el mismo órgano llamado de diferentes
has
maneras, pero es lo
different
mismo,
names,
lo van a ver
but
en
you
diferentes
will be seeing this
publicaciones
in
y
different publications and
documentos.
documents.
Y es el grupo, de
This
alguna forma, de
is the
representantes
group
de las distintas
with
comunidades de registros
representatives of
nacionales
the different regional
que asesoran a
registries
ICANN en los temas
and
vinculados a lo que
that
son las
through
políticas
ICANN have to
regionales,
do with the
políticas de recursos numéricos de
number
Internet.
resources of the internet.
Así que, bueno, básicamente hay tres
So there
miembros
are three
representantes de cada región, y
representatives
aquí
from
tenemos la
each
suerte de poder
region,
contar
and we have
con los de la nuestra.
the representatives of
Y
our
bueno, más
region
allá de las
today
funciones y
and
todo eso,
beyond
que
the
no es para
functions,
entrar tanto en
and
el
we don't
detalle,
go
que
into the
sepan que, bueno, que
details.
justamente uno de
Precisely
los enfoques
one
del
of
trabajo que se está
the
teniendo a cabo este
points
año y el
of
año
this
pasado, y bueno, veremos a ver
work
los próximos meses cómo sigue, es este proceso
is
de
precisely
revisión del documento
the
del
review
ICP2, y
of
por eso
this
estamos
document of the
teniendo
ICP2,
esta
and that is why
instancia
we're having
para
this
poder
webinar
presentar
today
adecuadamente la
so that we
información.
can share the information
Bueno,
with you.
comentarles quiénes son los
These are
integrantes
the
actuales
current members
de Lazo
of
AC.
the
Tenemos a los
SOAC.
miembros
We have the
representantes
members
de ARIN,
who
APNIC.
represent
Justo
ARIN,
la semana
APNIC.
pasada
Last week,
tuvo lugar la sesión de
there was
APNIC
an APNIC session.
en el evento de APNIC
During the
60, donde
APNIC
también tuvieron
60
una
event,
instancia
they had
presencial y
an
virtual
in-person and a
presentando
virtual
el documento, la
instance
evolución.
presenting the document and the
Luego
current
están los
status. Then
representantes
we
de
have the
LACNIC, de la región de
representatives of
LACNIC y de RIP.
LACNIC and the
Y bueno, y antes de seguir le
RIPE
doy la
members.
palabra
Before,
a Ricardo Patara, que
I
va a estar
would
presentando,
now
bueno,
like to give the floor to
por
Ricardo
qué la revisión de
Patara,
este
who will be
documento,
explaining why
y le
we
doy
are
la palabra, él va a
reviewing this
estar hablando
document. He
en
will be
portugués, así que como
speaking in
comento,
Portuguese. So
Sandra,
like
pueden estar
Sandra was
haciendo uso
saying,
del servicio
you
de
can
interpretación.
take the option of listening to the
Olá, Maria, boa
interpretation.
tarde.
Thank you.
Obrigado
Good
pela introdução.
afternoon.
Boa tarde a todos os
Good
participantes. É uma
afternoon,
satisfação
everyone.
poder contar
It's a pleasure
com a
to
audiência de vocês e também
share
possíveis perguntas,
this
comentários.
session with you,
Como a Maria comentou, como
and
uma
we'll welcome
introdução,
any
o porquê
questions
desse
or comments.
documento,
Like
né?
Maria was
Vamos
saying,
contar um
the
pouquinho da história
reason for
do
having this
documento.
document
Existe um
is the
documento
first topic. Let
atualmente
me tell you
justamente
about the
por isso.
history of this document. There is
Ele
a
tem a
current document
função
that is
de auxiliar
ICP2
a
that
ICANN e os
has
vírus da
the
existência
role
no
of
processo de
helping
reconhecimento e
ICANN
estabelecimento
along
de
the
novos
process of
registros regionais.
recognizing
Esse
and
documento
establishing
tem
new
25 anos já.
regional
Nesse
RIRs.
quase
This document
quarto de
is already
século,
25 years
muita
old,
coisa mudou, tanto
almost a
na
quarter
internet, mas
of a
também na
century.
relação entre
Much
as
has
instituições.
changed both in
Nesse
the
meio
internet
termo,
and also
nesse
the
meio termo,
relationship
temos
between the
novas
different
instituições,
institutions.
processo de
We
governança em
now
termos
have
de
new
riscos, relação da ICA com
institutions
os riscos,
with
relação entre
different
os riscos,
options for governance, the
tudo
relationship
modificável.
within ICANN and the
O documento
RIRs.
precisa,
All these things have
por causa disso,
evolved
de uma
and
revisão.
changed.
Só
That
contando um
is
pouquinho da
why
história, se a
this
gente pegar nessa
document
tabela que está à
has to
esquerda,
be reviewed.
temos ali uma
We
ordem
have
da
this table
criação dos
on the
registros
left,
regionais até
which
então,
shows
92,
how
o
this has evolved
ICP,
since
ARIN,
the creation of the
APNIC,
regional
ARIN, assim por diante,
RIRs
e
and
a ICA
all the
sendo
different
reconhecida depois,
stages.
em 98.
And then
Em
ICANN
2001,
was recognized
vem
in
esse documento,
1998.
CP2, que
In
nós estamos comentando, e
2001,
ele foi
we
importante,
now have
porque
this
ele foi
document
utilizado no reconhecimento do
ICP2,
LACNIC, que
which
aconteceu em
arose and
2002,
was used to
e depois,
recognize
posteriormente,
LACNIC. That was in
no estabelecimento do
2002.
AFRENIC em
Following
2005.
that,
Então, ele teve
when
o seu
AFRINIC
papel, ele
was
foi importante,
established in the
mas,
year
como eu disse,
2005. So it played an
quase 25
important
anos já se
role.
passaram
But as
e
I
você precisa de uma
explained,
revisão.
this dates back 25
Especificamente,
years
dois
already.
pontos que
That is
chamam a
why there is a
atenção, que
need
são
to
endereçados
review
nesse
this.
processo,
There are two
são
points
a
that call the
responsabilidade
attention and have to do
contínua
with the
dos
process.
riscos, uma vez
We have the
reconhecidos, e
ongoing
tem que continuar
responsibilities
fazendo,
of
se
the
preocupar.
RIRs once they have
Isso, de
been
alguma forma,
recognized
está
and
implícito no
what they have to
documento,
continue
no
doing.
CP2,
To
no
a
documento
certain
que vem,
extent, this is
mas é
implicit
interessante
in
deixar
the document
deixar
ICP2,
claro que
which is
vem
now in force.
claro, bem
But
explícito
it
nesse
is
documento
important,
que vem a substituí-lo. E
and
também
although
possibilidade
this
em
is
vir
very clear,
prever
it will
o
be
status de vir
improved
a
in the
revogação do seu
proposed
reconhecimento,
document.
caso essas responsabilidades que
And then
estão
we
lá
have
escritas no
the
documento não sejam
topic
cumpridas.
of
Então, é algo que não
derecognition.
existe hoje de
For
forma
example,
clara e
if the
explícita no documento,
responsibilities
que
established in the
motivou
document are not complied with,
esse
this is
grupo
one of the things that is
a
not very
revisar o
clear
documento,
in
colocar
the
esses
current
pontos e também
document.
outros que vão
That
ser
is why
endereçados mais
the
adiante.
group decided to
Podemos
review
passar
this
para o próximo
document
slide.
to see how we can deal with these things that we'll be
Aqui
discussing
pouquinho
later on.
da história de como começou esse
Now, let me
processo.
give
Então,
you
lá em
a bit of
2003,
the history of
2023,
how this process
o
began
NRO,
in
que é uma organização que
2023. The
representa
NRO,
os riscos
which is
existentes
the
em conjunto em
numbers
suas operações,
council,
solicitou
requested the ASOAC, the group mentioned by Maria, to carry out two tasks. One is to review the implementation process of the process explained in document ICP2. We have the document here, which can serve as a guide, but so far there was no process that explained this step by step. This was done in 2023. This was reviewed by ASOAC. So they had to check a new version. So some of the aspects that were not clear led to the need of reviewing this document to propose a new document that would then replace ICP2. So looking at the timeline of this entire process, in 2023, the NRO requested these tasks in 2023, and in October 2024, about less than a year later, the first document came up for consultation, and that document includes the principles and a new version of ICP2.
So this went for a public consultation, and we requested the participation of the community as a whole with a participative process. And from December and February, the responses were received. And in February, they published a report describing the survey, considering the principles that were commented in the first consultation, and they published the first release of the document that has the guidelines for the recognition of the IRRs. That is the RRR governance document. And so there were consultations about the more formalized document in April 2025. And now, having completed the review and having received the comments and the feedback and the corrections of the document, they published the second review that is in part present in open consultation, as Maria pointed out. So we are now asking about the second release of the document, that is an enhanced version based on the feedback received since April 2025. So here you have a timetable with these gray boxes. Then in the different quarters, in the first quarter, that's a bit more bluish between the third and fourth quarters of 2025, and it is precisely the time for a review and receiving public comments about the second release of this governance document. I remind you that there was a first release, we received feedback that were considered in depth, and now this is a second version, and we are trying to promote the engagement of the community for this second release. Now, having completed that part, we are going to move forward for the final version of the document to the first quarter of 2026, and then with the final version, have possibility, we will have the IRRs, but for that, we don't have a date, but it would be after the final release in the first quarter of 2026. So as a reference to the documents mentioned, we have the first that has the principles that should be considered in a next version of the document. To the right, the first draft of the document that was then you were required to give your feedback. And now we have the second version of the document that appears in this code. I invite you all, those of you who haven't seen it, to please take a look at this document so that you can send your feedback now or in future opportunities. We'll have the LACNIC event next month where you'll have an opportunity for comments. This is the second version of the document that considers the feedback and the reviews in of the first draft. These are the documents that Maria mentioned that are very important, and they will help us understand the phases. The first link compares the two versions. What appeared in version 1 was adjusted, and it is interesting to see that the first version may have some items that needed clarification, and that was done in version 2 in the document of the second link that gives an explanation of each change. So, whenever there was an adjustment, here you have an explanation. The community thought that that was necessary. They saw a need for it to appear, and everything was very well explained, ensuring transparency of the process. I invite you to see these documents. Now, going to the second version of the document, let me tell you that we again, let's see the changes. In a nutshell, I'll show you the changes and then we'll discuss them in further detail. First of all, the title, the initial title, was considered to be a bit confusing. It was too broad, or according to some people, with regard to the scope, the expectations of the document. The preamble, that is before describing the procedures and the descriptions of the document, it was expanded. It was broadened, explaining the document better. And there were also some comments that generated doubts as to whether we needed details for the implementation of the routes. So in the preamble, this is very well clarified and explained that there will be another document with the implementation procedures. So we have the governance guideline for maintaining the IRR, and then there will be another document, how it will be implemented, etc. So in the second version, it is clearer. And some of the implementations that were challenged during the review appear in a later document. So let's see more changes. We have the recognition and revoking of the acknowledgement, and there was a concern that was brought about by the community. There was sort of the need in the process of approval of the IRR. They required a unanimous vote for approval. That is no longer so. You don't need a unanimous position, but it is described very clearly in this new draft. There were also some changes on some issues related to audits. This document will highlight items where the IRRs need to pay close attention when assessing the way they are run. So we anticipated that governance is possible when requesting audits to check whether the role is being done well. The auditing processes also had changes, also based on the community's feedback. And last but not least is the process of continuity urgency. Let's assume that an IRR is going through a very peculiar situation that may have an impact on its operations. So, and the other IRRs, the members, could assume that operation as an for a certain period, so that that IRR that is going through that may get organized. And there's a new version that basically this is briefly described. So here we have the key points that will be further developed by the next speakers. Thank you.
Ay,
Bueno.
gracias, Ricardo. Perdón.
Ricardo,
Darte la palabra a ti,
I
Esteban.
wanted to give you the floor, Esteban.
Del
Yes.
contexto que nos ha dado
After
Ricardo,
Ricardo's
con algunos
context,
de los temas que también
we'll
nos ha ido
go on with
explicando
some of the
Ricardo,
topics
pero
that
más que
Ricardo
con
explained, but
Esteban. Y comentarte una cosa, perdón,
Esteban will go more in
un
depth.
momentito cuando termine
And then
la
afterwards, when
parte de
Esteban
reconocimiento y
is done
reconocimiento,
with the recognition, we are going to leave some time for comments or questions. So if you have any doubts, please keep an eye on that. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Ricardo. Well, I was listening to you, and I see that a lot of work has been completed, but there is also a lot of work to be done in this update of I2. So we are very happy as a community to be working in the update of this document that is so important for the governance of the entire ecosystem of the Internet numbers community. So let's see now in greater detail what changed in between the two versions. The first thing that I wanted to share is, well, the case of the title. It might appear to be just a formal correction, but actually it goes a bit beyond that, and it has to do with the content of the document. The document is called Document of Governance for the Recognition, Maintenance, and Revoking of the Recognition of the Internet Regional Registries. And now we include the term operation. It's a document of governance for the recognition, the operation, and the revoking of the recognition of the Internet Regional Registries. So because the word operation better describes the requirements, we need to think that this document is aimed not to the requirements on minute zero when the registry is recognized, but throughout the lifetime of that IRR. It establishes the obligations and the commitments that the IRR must meet. So that is why it's important to incorporate the term operation. Another key change is including a broader preamble. You know that the preamble is aimed at interpreting or establishing a framework of reference to the entire document. So in this case, we try to have a broader preamble that better describes the purpose and the goals of the document to provide a better context for those that are reading the document and trying to complete it, so that you can explain how the provisions intend to promote certain goals. In our internal discussions, we consider this important because the name, when we speak of governance, well, it seems as if it were a document that should encompass all aspects in the life of an IRR. So we adjusted the title, and in addition to this expanded preamble, it makes it easy to interpret this document, and so that we may give it the scope of application and its proper contents. Another change has to do with expressly saying that there will be implementation procedures. So this is a document that could encompass a number of aspects, but we saw that the important thing is to focus on the contents. That is, those key aspects of recognition and revoking recognition and the operation of the IRRs, and leave some cases precisely for further standards or documents. So in the new section 1.3 points out that the IRRs and ICON may develop joint additional procedures or specific to implement the governance documents of the IRRs. Because we need to address the concerns of the community that must develop details or procedures around the general obligations of the governance IRR governance document. The key issue of the document that brings more interest is this recognition and revoking recognition. So now we're going to see the differences between versions 1 and 2 about these aspects. First of all, with regard recognition, a candidate IRR may be recognized without the unanimous support of the current IRRs as long as an independent third party designated by ICANN determines that a single IRR made a material error or provided an inadequate justification in its recommendation to not recognize the candidate. So the rationale is that they identified the concern that an IRR could oppose the recognition of a new IRR because of inadequate or illegitimate reasons. So we established a mechanism that makes it possible to invalidate the decision of an IRR that is not in agreement, ensuring that the IRRs will not be obliged to establish commercial relations with new entities that may be illicit in their respective jurisdiction. So in the different, this is a single system for administration of the internet resources. And in the case, if there is a request for recognition by a third party, if there is no unanimity, then you can request an independent third party to review that decision. Hence, we can prevent a blockade that could jeopardize the operations of the system and make it impossible for a new IRR to operate. Likewise, with regard revoking recognition, that is one of the key issues. They incorporated additional protections for an IRR that is affected by a process of revoking of recognition. So that proposal needs to meet the minimal requirements that are established in the document. And in the process, we give the possibility to the IRR to defend itself and to respond in writing. All this in a context of transparency, where ICANN must publish and justify the reasons of their decision. And what is the rationale? Because it's important to ensure that the process of revoking the recognition may be transparent and that it meets the requirements of the IRR governance document and protects the rights of the IRR affected. And now the revoking recognition is the last resource in the system, and the IRR that is experiencing difficulties and that will always be given the possibility of making up for that problem. Now, as to who can request the revoking of the recognition, there are changes. On the one hand, we establish a threshold to start this process for starting the revoking of recognition with 2,000 members, or 25% of the members of an IRR, whatever is lesser. This threshold responds to some concerns of the communities, a community that is affected because of the operations of an IRR may request the process of revoking. So the response is yes, starting with this version. So we need to gather a number of position so that it won't be a unilateral position of just a minority. And ICANN can also start the revoking of recognition, but it cannot do it on it themselves, but they need, as in version 1, the participation of the other IRRs. What is the rationale for these changes? Well, we see that in the various IRRs, there are different number of members and different criteria to consider what a member is. So that is why this is a threshold that is good for all the IRRs, and we understand that it is a sort of standardized bar for all. And if you allow somebody to start this, you ensure additional neutrality. So far, we described the most complex themes. And well, I don't know whether any other participants in the webinar have any questions of what Ricardo said and what I said so far. I don't see any questions, Esteban, but before we go on to discuss the audits, well, we are telling you about the changes and the community. Well, it must understand that this is not a straightforward process. So please consider that since we received the feedback of the first round of the survey, you already mentioned it, but what were the most controversial themes at the ASO so that we could implement this new draft? Well, there were many issues that were debated in length. One especially has to do with the threshold. That is, what number of IRRs must agree to recognize a new IRR. The original document just mentioned unanimity, but so the community was worried about that, the fact that it should be unanimous, and we thought that it wouldn't make the system stable, as it is one only system, and each IRR administrates the resources in the region, but does it in coordination with the rest of the IRRs. We believe that it was important to, in the case of recognition, to have the consent of the IRR that could be affected, either because they are changing their area of service or because there are some other types of criteria that were important. So this is one of the decisions that brought about more debate. But finally, we found this system that somehow preserves that unanimity, but it's not absolute unanimity. But if it is understood that some of the IRRs was not accepting the recognition, and that is an arbitrary decision based on some type of error, then an independent third party may be asked to review that, and the IRR that is not in agreement may be requested to revisit their decision. I think that this was the way we could find compatibility between the criterion of unanimity so as to coordinate the entire system, and on the other hand, to ensure that there will be no vetoes, or nobody will have the right to block any IRRs for the recognition of a new regional registry. Thank you, Esteban. I don't see any questions, and I understand that it's quite a dense topic, but we want to bring this to the community so that they may understand what changed from one document with the other. We go on with the part of the audits. We'll leave a QA time for the end. So now let's discuss the next topics. Yes, with regard to the audits, this is another topic that we debated because the aim of the audit is to be an early warning of an IRR that is undergoing difficulties. That is, how do we learn as a global community that an IRR is experiencing difficulties? Well, it's through regular audits with public results that allow the community to know the level of compliance or non-compliance to the obligations established for an IRR. So there we have these ad hoc audits that may be requested by the other IRRs. And, well, in this case, the other IRRs see that we have an IRR that is experiencing difficulties. They may request an audit, or, for instance, with a threshold of 2 members or 25% of the members, whatever is the lowest, or they can ask for an audit, or even ICANN can request the audit. So we believe that this is very important, and it is offering additional mechanisms to express the potential non-compliances of an IRR early. Thank you, Esteban. There's a question here, so let's take advantage because this is the first question. Oscar Robles is asking, in the definition of member, limiting this definition to the capacity of electing the board. In the past, this was one of the capacities of a member, but you deleted the word including. What is the reason for that? Yes, Oscar. Let me read the definition. Member is a legal or physical person as appropriate that has the right to participate in the governance of an IRR when voting to elect the members of their regulatory body. We looked for a definition that could be useful for the different legal systems and the different statutes of each IRR. So it's not as precise, but it can be interpreted based on the laws of constitution of the network. So the idea of each member, the way we understand it at LACNIC, is those that have the capacity to vote and to participate of the selection of the board. That is, being able to elect the body of a governance for administrating the IRR. We have more questions, so I'm going to leave some time for that. Nicolas Fiumarelli is asking, what would the temporary assumption of the operation be for a temporary operator? This includes migrating to the RPKI, DNS reverse. Could we continue to assign resources, creating ROAs? Well, the idea is that, yes, the temporary operator, in the document called the emergency operator, should be the one that provides continuity service of the registry in exceptional cases, both because of the lack of compliance of the obligations established in the document, or because of natural disaster, force majeure, acts of God. But precisely the aim of that emergency operator is making sure that the services of the IRR are maintained in the region affected by this exceptional situation. Yes, now we are going to see that with Jorge. Oscar is asking, the definition of open membership explicitly included legal or physical person. This may pose challenges in the treatment of personal data for all the IRRs, depending on the GDPR and similar and the like. Did you debate this impact? Yes, we did, in length. Each region did it based on their own characteristics. In Europe, they were more concerned about the GDPR and all its implications, but again, try to set the common basis that could be good for all the regions without addressing specificities of each region, so that we could have a document that could be good for all the regions. And this membership, the open membership as a criterion, as a governance of an IRR, is this is desirable. And that and they can be legal or physical persons, but always in compliance with the bylaws and the local laws, and even the policy for the assignment of resources in each region. Good. I see that we have a question by Lito Ibarra on the situation of the emergency operator. So Esteban, maybe we can leave it for later because Jorge will give a presentation now. Yes, you may go on with the presentation if you wish. Yes, so this would be the next slide. The issue of audits, there are two types of audits, the ad hoc audits. If there was some concern, the members can request it, or the other IRRs or ICON may request it. But in addition to that, we have a regular audits. So it's a sort of general principle that the IRRs must undergo regular audits. Now, what we establish is that those audits should be at least every 3 years. And the idea is to provide more specificity about the frequency of the regular audits and to ensure that the problems are identified early. So we see that as a check of the situation of the IRR. And if there is compliance of some, if there's an anomaly, we may give some time to make up for that non-compliance so that they can continue to provide services with the quality parameters that are required by the community. And now we go on with continuity in the emergency. This is new. So now I give the floor to Jorge so that he may continue with the presentation. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Maria. And I want to thank all the friends that joined this webinar. I think that this is increasingly important in all the regions. So let me tell you a bit about this topic. So although Esteban already mentioned some aspects and Ricardo mentioned others, but let me tell you very quickly. Actually, the IRR, well, we would all like it to operate well and not to have any failures, so that no downtime, so that we can assure the continuity of operation and business of all the members, and so as to help with the development of all the societies that, of course, benefit of these resources. But in addition to this is not just a local issue, it's a global issue. So the interesting thing is that all the registries should operate well, so that so that this economic and social issue may operate globally. So that is theory, and everything was very nice, but there may be situations where indeed an IRR may not be capable of doing their job satisfactorily. And we identified two key scenarios. One where there's a temporary situation. It may be days because of a natural disaster that prevents the registry to continue to operate during a relatively short time, but the service is impaired. But also in the cases where there's a process revoking a recognition, and that process may be delayed, may be so it can have a negative impact on the operations of an IRR. At any rate, we want to avoid any problems in the memberships, and so we wanted to include in the document that we need to have a document so as to quickly and temporarily transfer the responsibilities of an IRR to an emergency operator. And this will be jointly defined between all the rest of the registries and ICANN. In this case, because some may have a concern, some may say, well, and who will be the emergency operator of LACNIC? Well, this is still open to the implementation part. We are just saying in the document that it is important to have it and that we need to design a mechanism. So this is part of the implementation. And something that is essential is that this will be for a limited time. So this does not a revoking recognition, but it's a way we can solve a crisis that may appear at a certain time. In the next slide, you'll see that we are just talking we're just saying that this temporary operation of an emergency operator is limiting to 90 days. So this is quite a short process, up to 90 days. And if in 90 days it's been impossible to solve the problem, well, we'll have to have a formal review of the process. But this is important. To do this process, to formalize it, we need to have a public justification, and you need to send an open query to the community. So here we are saying that it's a process that needs to be absolutely transparent, ensuring the accountability of an emergency operator to provide continuity to the operations of that IRR in trouble. And once the issue is solved, the IRR resumes normal operations. Both the IRRs and ICANN will have to review what happened, draft a report, and give some feedback to the community. This will help us learn what happened so that we can incorporate that in the operative processes so that we can use it in the future, in future situations in that same registry or in another IRR. I also wanted to tell you of some changes, several changes that were added in this case. Well, in the slide, we have one. I'm going to mention them the other way. That is, and it says, if you read the original ICP2, you may realize that there are quite a few differences versus the current document. This document is much broader and longer with more details, and therefore being able to implement everything that is in the new document takes a certain time. What is defined here is that the period for complying with everything that is said in this document is 3 years. And afterwards, we are including that each change in the document in the future may include some time associated so that that change may be implemented in the different IRRs. So it is not that we want this to happen. We want this to happen, and this must be done in this period of time. In addition, there's a new section where we include that each IRR needs to have a mechanism for conflict resolution. where the members of each registry may request their case to be considered. And there's another thing that is important, although it may sound quite simple, it's that up to today, our experience in the internet ecosystem is that all the IRRs operate bona fide. But this is important, not just that for this to happen, but it must also include it in the document so that in the future we may consider it for the new updates and how this ecosystem will operate for a certain period. So what we are saying is that the registries will act bona fide and impartially following this document, and all the actions need to be implemented in a short time, relatively short, and with reasonable deadlines. These are some of the things that have been incorporated and that I wanted to mention this afternoon.
María, yo termino, entonces voy a hacer un par de recordatorios acá a los amigos y después pasamos a las preguntas.
So I will make a couple of reminders and we go on to the questions afterwards.
Entonces, bueno, primero, yo
So
quiero
first of all,
recordarles
let me
que
remind you that this
comenzó el 28 de agosto y va a
consultation
estar
began on
abierta
August the
hasta el 7
28th
de
and will be
noviembre.
open through to November the
Entonces, aquí
7th.
es importante entender
It's
lo
important to
siguiente.
understand the
Estamos
following.
hablando de un
We are
documento
speaking about
marco
a framework
donde
document
tiene todo un grupo de principios, un grupo de
containing set of
definiciones,
principles, a
pero
set
este
of
documento
definitions, but this
deberá ir
document should
acompañado
be
de un grupo de
accompanied
documentos
by
de
a set of
implementación.
implementation
Entonces,
documents.
eso es
And this
importante
is
porque a
important
veces hay
because sometimes there
preguntas
are
o feedback
questions
que
or there
llegan
is
toda la
feedback
consulta
that we
y que
receive,
tienen más que ver
and
con
this
la
has to do
implementación en
with
sí
the
que
implementation as
con el
such and not so
contenido
much
como
the
tal del
content
documento,
of
las
the
guías que
document
estamos tratando de
itself and the
establecer, y
guidelines
eso es un
that
poco
we're
lo
trying to
que
establish.
estamos
And
viendo.
this is precisely what we are
También es
seeing. It is
importante,
also important
o sea, que este
to
documento,
note
o sea,
that
recibir el
this
feedback y saber
document
que este
re-
documento, o sea,
should
satisface
be receive
las
feedback. We
inquietudes
should receive
que había
feedback on
generado la
this
primera
document,
versión.
and
Y bueno, algo
we
fundamental
responded
es
to
que,
some of
bueno,
the
con independencia de
concerns
estas dos cosas, pues
contained in the
invitamos a
first
todos
version. So
a
we
participar
invite everyone
con sus
to
comentarios
participate. We would like to receive your
en este
comments, your
proceso de
input
consulta, que como les
during this
comentaba, está
consultation
abierto
process.
hasta
As I
el
was saying,
7
this
de
is open
noviembre.
through to November the 7th.
Para esto, bueno, hay una lista
There
regional.
is a regional
Me parece
list.
que todos los que estamos
I
en el
think all
webinar
those
estamos
who are
suscritos, pero
in
de todas
this
maneras,
webinar have
como
subscribed
quiera
to
que el
this
material
list,
va a quedar
but
disponible
this
para todas las
material
personas
will be
interesadas,
made available to all
aquí está,
the
bueno, la
people who are interested
información de
in it. This
cómo suscribirse a
slide
la lista.
contains information
Está
as
con
to
este
how to
código
subscribe
QR
the list. You can
el
check
acceso
this
a las listas
QR
similares que
code
están
that
en otros
provides
lugares y
access
en las
to
otras
other lists in
comunidades.
other
Y
communities.
bueno, también
And
aprovecho para
I'd also
adelantarles
like
que
to
vamos
tell
a
you
tener una
that there
sesión
will be
el día
a
8 de
session on
octubre
October the 8th
en LACNIC
during
44, LACNIC
the
2025,
LACNIC
a las
44
20
LACNIC
horas
for
UTC. Vamos a tener
2025
una sesión
event
y
at
bueno, ya pueden registrarse
20
al evento LACNIC
at
44,
8
está abierto el
p.m. at
registro. Así
20
que esto es lo
UTC.
próximo
So
que
this is
vamos a tener.
the next session we'll be having.
Y bueno, por último, ya
To
dejarles
close,
nuevamente
once
el
again, I
QR
would like
donde está
to
el documento que
leave
hemos
this QR
estado,
code
sobre el que hemos estado
where you can find
conversando
the
hoy,
document we
para
discussed
que
today,
los que no lo hayan
so that those
leído
of you
tengan
who haven't
posibilidad
read it
de
yet can
evaluarlo,
have the
revisarlo
option to
y, por supuesto,
check
tener
this
sus
out,
comentarios
revise it,
y verter
and
estos comentarios a
send
través
us
de la
your
lista de
input
correos que les
through
comentaba
the mailing
anteriormente
list that I mentioned
y
previously.
también,
And
bueno,
also,
poder hacer sus preguntas,
you
sus
can
comentarios durante el
feel
ACNI
free to
44
ask
en
your
esta sesión que
questions
vamos a tener allí.
and submit your comments
Y
during the
bueno, todo
LACNIC
ese
44
feedback
event.
nos va a
All that
ayudar
feedback
para
will serve
hacer la parte
as
conclusiva
input
del documento.
to include
Así que
in
bueno, creo
the
que por el
final
momento
document. So for the
es
time
todo
being,
lo que
this
quería
is what
comentarles.
I wanted
Así que
to
devuelvo la
share with
palabra a
you, and
María.
I give the floor back to
Vale,
Maria.
gracias, Jorge.
Thank
Sí,
you,
veo que hay
Jorge.
algunos
I see
comentarios
there
que
are
hemos
some
dejado,
comments,
por ejemplo, el de
for
Lito
example,
sobre el
Lito
operador de emergencia, si
on
quieres lo
the
volvemos a buscar
emergency
ahora.
cooperation.
Y bueno,
And Lito Ibarra
un
says
operador
that
de
an
emergencia dice será
emergency
definido y
cooperator
aceptado
could be
por los
defined
RIRs
and
y
accepted
ICANN.
by the
Asumo que las
ICANN RIRs.
especificaciones
I
de dicho
assume that the
operador son parte de la
specifications of the
implementación.
operator are part of the
¿Piensa NR
implementation.
preparar este
Are you
manual de
considering
implementación?
to
Y si es
review
así,
the
¿cuándo?
implementation manual? And if so, when?
En realidad, pues esta
Well, in
parte del
fact,
operador de
that part of
emergencia
the emergency operator
es decir, es algo que,
is something
que está dentro de la operación,
that
o sea,
is
el proceso de implementación y que por
considered in
supuesto
the
el NRO
implementation process. And
lo tiene que establecer en
this
sus
is something
manuales.
that should
La
be
fecha sí habría que
specified in the
preguntársela
manuals.
directamente al
Regarding the
NRO,
date, we should ask this to the
pero ya
NRO.
se está trabajando,
But
digamos,
work is already
o
being
sea,
carried
ellos
out.
están
They are
evaluando todo lo que estamos haciendo y
evaluating
por
all the
supuesto
work we
ya
are
están
doing,
tomando
and
algunas
they're also
previsiones, están visualizando algunos temas
visualizing some of the
de los que
topics
estamos
that
viendo,
we
con,
are
sobre todo
referring
con el
to,
equipo legal,
particularly with the
porque
legal
evidentemente todo este tema
experts,
del
particularly
operador de emergencia
this
lleva
regarding the
asociado,
emergency operator, because this is
o
associated
sea, temas
to
legales con el
legal
tema de la
topics
protección de
because
datos,
of
la
data protection
confidencialidad,
issues,
etcétera. Y
confidentiality,
entonces,
and so
bueno,
on.
todo esto el
So
equipo legal
the
del NRO, por
legal
supuesto, está trabajando
experts
y
are
viendo
working on this
las
and
implicaciones. Así que,
considering all the implications
no,
this
Lito,
has.
no te puedo
So,
dar una
Lito, I
fecha porque
cannot
no la
give
tengo,
you
pero
an answer, an
seguro
exact
de que
answer, but
será de las
I'm
cosas que
confident that
van
this will be one
a
of the
salir
things that will
en
be
tiempo y bien hecho.
included
O sea, porque
and
además
will also
es
be well done
fundamental
because it
garantizar
is
la continuidad
important
de
to
operación.
guarantee the continuation of operations.
Bueno,
María,
gracias. Sí, ¿quieres comentar algo,
Would
Esteban?
you like to add
no, si me
something,
permitís como
Esteban?
comentario
Well,
general,
as a
porque por
general
ahí nos
comment,
escuchan a nosotros de alguna manera defendiendo el
we
documento
are
y creo que
you're
esto es
listening to us as if
importante
we were
decirlo
defending
que
the
si bien,
document.
digamos, con Jorge,
And although with
Ricardo
Jorge, with
y el resto de los
Ricardo, and the
integrantes del
rest of the
ASOAC
members
estamos
of the
como muy
SOAC
involucrados
are very much
en este
involved
documento y
in
le
this
hemos puesto,
document,
digamos, muchas
we
horas
have
y, digamos,
dedicated
hay
a
muchos
lot
también
of work,
sentimientos
and there's
en
also
juego detrás
many things
de cada uno
at
de estos
stake behind all
párrafos.
these paragraphs.
Nada, el documento justamente es para
This
criticarlos.
document is
Nosotros
there
lo que necesitamos es
to
que
be
la comunidad nos dé su
criticized. We
opinión,
need the
que la
community to
comunidad
give
nos
us
marque
their
qué cosas están bien, qué
opinions.
cosas están
The
mal, qué
community
cosas
has
hay
to
que
highlight what
mejorar.
is
Y no
correct,
queda
what is not
claro
correct, what is
qué
not
cosas
clear,
por
what can
ahí,
be improved, what
digamos, no
are the
estamos
things
viendo,
that
¿no?
we
Y por eso
haven't uh,
es
considered.
la importancia de
That
pedirle a
is
todos
why
que
we
participen
ask
y que
you
nos
all
hagan
to
llegar sus
participate and to
comentarios,
please
¿no?
provide
Tanto
us with your
la lista
feedback,
de
both
correo
in the
regional
regional mailing list,
como cuando tengamos
and once
nuestra
we
sesión
have the
especial
special
en El
session
Salvador,
in El Salvador
como
as
a
well,
través de digamos, los
in
diferentes
addition to the
canales que
different
existen
channels
para poder
that are
participar, ¿no?
available
Me parece
for
muy
everyone to
importante y no
participate. I think
porque
this is very
nosotros
important, not
defendamos el
because we
documento
would
con
be
vehemencia,
defending the
quiere decir
document
que no se puede criticar,
intensively.
¿no?
This
Sino que al
does not
revés,
imply that we cannot
estamos
criticize it.
abiertos
In
y
other words,
esperamos que por
we
favor
really
nos
are
hagan llegar sus
open.
comentarios,
We
positivos,
welcome any
negativos,
comments,
como decía,
positive feedback,
correcciones
negative feedback,
de
suggestions for
puntos
correcting
que estén
things,
faltando.
or anything that might be missing.
Gracias, Esteban.
Thank you,
Bueno, hay
Esteban.
otro comentario. Este es un
This is
comentario
the
de
comment
Oscar,
from Oscar.
también sobre el tema de
This
continuidad de
also has to
emergencia.
do
Dice,
with
en el artículo 5,
continuity, emergency
continuidad de
continuity.
emergencia, se mencionan los
Article 5
servicios de los
mentions
RIRs
the
afectados.
services of the
Creo que sería
affected
imposible
RIRs.
restablecer
I think it would be
temporalmente
impossible to
todos
restore all
los servicios de un RIR y que tendría que ser un
in RIR.
subconjunto,
This would
los más
be like a
críticos para el
subset,
sistema global
the
de
ones that are more
numeración.
critical for
Con lo
the
anterior
global
sería
numbering
apropiado
system.
dejar claro
So it'd
eso
be
en el
clear to
5.1
clarify
y
that in
referirse a
5.1
servicios
and refer
críticos
to
del RIR.
critical RIR
Comento.
services.
Bien, es un muy buen
Well,
punto.
that's a very good
Tomo
point.
nota,
I take
Oscar,
note,
y nada,
Oscar,
digamos, lo tendremos en
and
cuenta
we'll take
para la
that
futura
into account
evolución del
for the
documento.
future
Es un buen
development of
punto.
the document.
Sí. Sí, sobre todo porque, porque es un
Yes,
proceso
particularly
temporal.
because this is like a temporary
Entonces es muy
process.
difícil
It
moverlo
won't
todo de
be
un lado al
easy to
otro.
move it entirely from one place to another.
Bueno, no veo
No, I
más
see that
preguntas,
there are no more
pero sí
questions,
me parece importante
but
esto
I think
que comentaba Esteban. O sea,
that
la
what
idea era
Esteban mentioned
presentar,
is very important.
primero que
The
tengan en cuenta
concept
que
is
más allá
that
de que se publicó el
beyond
documento y
the
les invitamos
document
a todos,
having
por
been
favor,
published, we
que lean los
urge
cambios
you
que
to read
hubo
the
de un documento
document,
al otro, que
to
eso es
read the
fundamental, que
changes
entiendan la
that were
especificación
done,
y que sumen
and to
en la lista que
please
tenemos
join
regional
the regional
todos los
mailing list.
comentarios, los detalles,
share
las
your
dudas que
comments,
tengan
your
para que
details,
justamente eso
any
se pueda
questions that
agregar
you might have,
luego
so that this can then
a la
be
conversación con el
raised to
resto
the
de
conversation
integrantes
with the
de la
other
SOC.
members of the SOAC.
Eso por un
That
lado, y por
on
el
one
otro, bueno,
hand,
nada,
and
comentar esto que reforzar esto que
also
decía
the
Jorge, que vamos a
concept
tener
of
una
what
sesión
Jorge
en
was
el
saying.
evento.
There
Nosotros
will
estamos
be a
recopilando
session
ahora
during
todos estos
LACNIC
comentarios que hay aquí,
44. We
preguntas,
are
pero si quieren poner más
bringing
detalle, me
together
parece
all
que está
the
bueno que
comments
echen la
received during
lista, porque ahí
today's
pueden
webinar, but please
explicar y luego eso da mucho
expand
contexto a la hora de
your
conversar con el
concepts
resto
in the mailing
de
list if you wish,
integrantes.
and they will
Y lo otro que
be
también
very
está bueno, que
useful.
lo comentó
And
Jorge,
what Jorge
es que
mentioned
todos
is
los
also
otros
important.
RIs están
All the
haciendo,
other
todas las otras
RIRs,
comunidades
all
de
the
los RIs
other
están haciendo
RI
también
communities
webinars y
are
sesiones,
organizing
y también hay
webinars,
preguntas, hay
so there are
consultas. Entonces, bueno,
questions that
les
come up.
animamos
So we
a que
encourage
se
you
sumen, a que las
to
puedan ver
join
grabadas,
these,
porque
to
a veces
read
los
the
horarios son
recordings. Sometimes, of course,
complicados y cada zona
the
horaria
time
es un...
zones vary from one
Pero sí que
region
se
to another.
pongan, que puedan entender
But
también el tipo de
we
consultas y
urge you to
comentarios que
see
hay en
the
otras
types of
regiones, porque de
comments
repente hay algo que
and
surge
questions
y
that come
queremos
up in
también de
other
alguna forma
regions. So this
reflejarlo,
is something
manifestarlos.
that we should
Es el
take into
momento,
account. This
tenemos
is the moment
un
to do
mes y
so. We
medio
still have a month
para
and a
cerrar
half
este
to
periodo de
go
consulta y lo
for
que no
this
queremos justamente,
consultation
y por
period.
falta de tiempo y
So
por
mm,
tema de oportunidad de la
we should take
información, de que nadie, de
this
que la información no
opportunity.
quedó de alguna forma pública o bien visibilizada, que la
It
gente
is
pueda
important
sumarse y dar
to
sus
really
opiniones
express
al proceso.
your opinions and contribute to this process.
Así que bueno, ahí estaríamos, no
So
sé,
that
creo que no hay
seems to
más,
be all. I
no
think
hay
there
más
are no more
comentarios.
comments.
Si les parece bien, cerramos
So
la
we would be
sesión.
then closing this
Como
session.
comentaba mi compañera Sandra,
Like Sandra was
este
saying,
webinar va a quedar
this
público, va a
webinar
quedar
will
grabado.
be is being
Y bueno,
recorded and
con
will
todos los
be
documentos
shared
que
with
hay, toda
you
la información, les seguiremos
together with all
animando a
the
que
documents
se complementen
available.
en la lista
So
y los
please
esperamos sí, en la
contribute
próxima
to the
sesión
list, and we look
que vamos a
forward
tener
to
el 8 de
seeing you
octubre
during the
en el
session
evento, que
of
también va a
October
ser
the
híbrido.
8th. During
Pueden
the event,
conectarse
this will be a hybrid
remotamente o
event. You could
presencial aquí en
join
Salvador. Así que nada,
remotely or
agradecerles
in
a todos,
person. Thank you
a
very much,
Esteban,
everyone. Thank you,
Jorge y
Esteban,
Ricardo,
Jorge, and Ricardo,
por poder tener esta
for
sesión y poder dar
being able to have this
esta
session
explicación
and
a toda la comunidad regional
explain
y bueno, a todos los que
this
nos han
document to the
escuchado hasta
regional
ahora y que se
community.
sigan
Community.
involucrando y
And all
apoyando
those
en el
who
proceso.
participated today, please
Gracias a
remain
todos.
involved. Thank you very much, everyone.
Hasta luego.
Goodbye.
Muchas gracias, hasta luego.
Bueno, hasta luego. Nos
Goodbye.
vemos en El
See you in
Salvador.
El Salvador.